Pride. My name is Lynn Faria. I use she or they pronouns, and I'm Sage's Executive Vice President. And I'm thrilled to have you here tonight for Sage's first CHIC event. Before we get into the program, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Julia. Julia is an 80-year-old lesbian living in Manhattan. Her partner passed away about 5 years ago, and she's been living alone throughout the pandemic. Julia is one of the many elders who Sage supported during the pandemic. After a call from a Sage staff member, Julia sent us the following email. I want to thank Sage so much, not just for the meal, but because you're letting people know we're not invisible. Knowing someone really does care about you in the middle of this crazy crisis really makes me feel a heck of a lot better. Thank you for all of your support. This is the work that Sage has done during the pandemic, refusing to let our elders be invisible or forgotten. In fact, since Sage's founding in 1978, we have worked tirelessly on behalf of LGBT older folks just like Julia. Building off of the momentum of the Stonewall Uprising and the emerging LGBT rights movement, a group of activists came together to form Sage to ensure that LGBT older people could age with dignity and respect, like they deserve. Today, Sage is the world's largest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBT older people. We provide services and support. We engage in training and advocacy with and on behalf of our LGBT elders. The reality is, today's elders in our community fought for and are still fighting for our rights. And it's so important to have discussions like the one we're having tonight to celebrate and pay homage to those on whose shoulders we stand, to shape our own future. What a better time to reflect on our past and our elders' resilience than during Pride Month. Throughout June, Sage will be celebrating the collective strength of our LGBT pioneers and our community. Together, we are Sage Strong. Today's event, CHIC, will be a reflection on our community's strengths, our history, and how that shapes who we are and where we are today. For so many of us, certainly myself included, LGBT centers, queer spaces, bars, clubs, parties were the places where we could finally be our true selves, be out and proud. From Eve's Hangout, a lesbian speakeasy that opened in 1925, to the Sahara, to Bonnie and Clyde's, to Henrietta, Hudson, lesbian and queer spaces have played an important role in the forming of our movement, in our activism, and in our defiance. Just expressing ourselves freely and living our identities freely is that defiance. Throughout history, a diversity of gender identities and expressions has defined lesbian and queer communities. From butch femme lesbians to androgynous folks to trans and non-binary people, the lesbian and queer community has and continues to reflect a spectrum of gender expressions and identities. And to reflect that spectrum, and to acknowledge that so many of us do not identify in the binary, we are changing the name of our event, formerly known as She, to CHIC, to make it welcoming to all in our community. And tonight, in our inaugural CHIC event, we'll explore lesbian and queer identities and spaces and discuss how our history informs our future. And speaking of our rich past and the legacies of those who came before us, I want to talk about Sage's women's dances. In the early 80s, a group of lesbian and queer women came together to fix a problem. There were few places for older lesbian and queer women to come together. Taking matters into their own hands, as our community is wont to do, these folks formed the Sage Women's Dance Committee. Their goal was to create a space for older lesbians and queer people to come together and dance, and to support Sage's work with and on behalf of LGBT older people while doing so. For nearly 40 years, this all-volunteer committee poured their hearts and souls into creating a welcoming, respectful, and really fun series of dances. The majority of that same group continues to organize these dances today, which is just incredible. They are fierce and they are fabulous, and only a global pandemic stopped them from producing the regular dances. I want to thank these members of the dance committee so much for their passion and commitment over the last 4 decades. Here's a video showcasing the dances throughout the years.
Not too long after SAGE was founded, a small group of dedicated volunteers led by Jerry Kalbus, Ruby Juster, Audrey Hartman, Liz Ferris, and others began organizing a safe space specifically intended for lesbians and queer women to come together for community and connection. It was here in the early 1980s that the SAGE Women's Dance Committee was formed.
The first SAGE dance was 40 years ago, and we are still the longest running dance for women today. Our committee has founding members who have served almost the entire 40 years that the committee has been in existence. The SAGE dances were so successful because of the dedication of the volunteers. They worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that every detail came into fruition.
SAGE dances have always been advertised as dances for all women of all ages, and that was certainly the case. What became more apparent over time was that SAGE dances became much more diverse and representative of our community, and that was really a wonderful thing to watch as the dances evolved over time.
As acceptance of the LGBT community increased, the crowds at the dances grew quite a following. Articles in Go magazine and even a spot in Fashion Bible Vogue raised awareness. At its peak, the SAGE Women's Dance drew in over 600 attendees, all lined up around the block to get in. Wherever the dance went, people followed, crisscrossing the city.
They would call and ask, Nicole, when is the next SAGE dance? Where is the venue? And the women just always said that they had a wonderful time there. Many of the women formed lifetime relationships, friendships, met their partners, and met people that they could relate to, enjoy dancing with, having drinks with.
All of the funds raised over the years have gone directly to support SAGE's mission to lead in addressing issues related to LGBT aging, ensuring that all LGBT older people have just and fair access to the opportunities they deserve and are free from ageism. Since its inception, SAGE has grown to be the world's oldest and largest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBT elders. The SAGE dances are a cornerstone of its impact on the LGBT community in New York City and beyond.
I don't know about you all, but I certainly miss dancing and certainly miss SAGE's women's dances, and hopefully we will be back at it in no time. As you can see, these dances are incredibly fun, and they also have been so important to provide a space for community and connection for lesbian and queer women in our community. Now we have an incredible panel for you tonight. With our guests today, we're going to talk about the spaces and places for lesbians and queer women across the decades. We'll explore the intersections of race, gender, and queerness, reflect on the past, and look to the future of lesbian and queer spaces. Without further ado, let's get to our panel. First, it's my pleasure to introduce my co-moderator for this evening, Mariam Adams. Mariam is a financial advisor and the head of the Adams Group at Merrill Lynch, the largest LGBTQ dedicated wealth management practice in New York City. She's long been a staunch advocate fighting for rights for the LGBT community, both within her company and within the community. She served on the boards of local nonprofits, including the Youth Homeless Service Organization, the Ali Forney Center, and the Gender and Family Project. Mariam is also an executive producer of the Lesbian Bar Project documentary, and she lives in Brooklyn with her wife and 2 daughters. Mariam, thank you for all of your work on behalf of our community, and welcome here tonight.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. My pronouns are she, her. I'm queer, non-binary, also a lesbian, and a non-Black person of color. My parents are Uzbeks who were born in Afghanistan. I'm not exactly what they imagined their young Muslim daughter would become as a grown-up, but here I am. Today, my day job is helping the LGBTQ community with their personal finances, and my current pandemic gay job is supporting our nightlife, our queer, lesbian, safe spaces through my work with the Lesbian Bar Project.
Thanks, Mariam. I'm psyched that you're here tonight, and what great synergy. Yes, I can't wait to chat with you and our panelists. So let's welcome our esteemed panelists for this evening. First, I'm thrilled to welcome Leslie Cohen. Leslie and her wife, Beth, served as models for the iconic sculpture Gay Liberation. And in her forthcoming memoir, The Audacity of a Kiss, Leslie tells the story of a love that has lasted for over 50 years and recounts her quest to build gay and feminist oases in New York, including the groundbreaking women's nightclub, Sahara. Thank you so much for being here, Leslie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be part of this panel, and I'm a staunch supporter of SAGE. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I am so thrilled to be joined tonight by Lisa Cannistraci. Lisa Cannistraci is the owner of Henrietta Hudson and has been an LGBTQ activist in New York City for over 3 decades now. Lisa has served for over 15 years as a full board member of the Community Board 2, focusing on social services and open spaces. Henrietta Hudson is the longest running lesbian bar in the country and has always been a venue with a conscientious and really has been utilized as a platform for social change. Lisa is the emeritus vice president of Marriage Equality USA and was present at SCOTUS when DOMA was struck down. So thank you so much, Lisa, for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Hi, it's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm a huge fan of SAGE. I had a very intimate, loving friendship with Stormy DeLauvery, and she loved SAGE. I was a friend of Edie Windsor. She loved SAGE. And we actually had the privilege of doing SAGE dances not that long ago when you guys stopped going to the Latin Quarter. And I enjoy it so much. And I'm always here for SAGE, whatever you guys need.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm sure we saw some shots of Henrietta Hudson's in the video we just watched. So
yes, thank you.
And finally, rounding out our panel, I'm so excited to welcome Imani Rashid. Imani is an elder, lesbian, educator, community organizer, and entrepreneur in New York City. I mean, seriously, Imani, what don't you do? Imani also started her activism in the LGBT movement as a member of Salsa Soul Sisters and was their Thursday night chairperson. Founded in 1974, Salsa Soul Sisters is the oldest Black lesbian organization in the U.S., offering a social and political alternative to the lesbian and gay bars. Imani currently serves on the board of African American Lesbians United for Change, which is the organization that evolved from Salsa Soul Sisters. She's also the author of Kwanzaa in the Gay and Lesbian Family and is a longtime SAGE Harlem participant. Thank you so much for making the time to be here tonight, Imani.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Now that we've introduced, let's get into our conversation. So over the years, the places that each of you have owned and engaged in has served as spaces for lesbian and queer folks to be together, to mingle, and to simply exist as our true selves. Leslie, I've read so much about the Sahara and how it's really broke the mold for lesbian bars at the time. What made the Sahara stand out? What was so unique about the space, and what did it feel like?
Wow. Again, you have to take it within the context of the times. And we were coming out of, my generation, coming out of the 50s and 60s, which, was so oppressive. And at the time that homosexuality was considered a disease and a perversity. And the nightclubs reflected that. The DSM, the Manual for Mental Health, labeled us as ill. And so the authorities, State Liquor Authority, the governments, everybody looked at us as perverts. So as that, in that context, that's how we grew up. And Then, of course, came the revolutions of the 60s, and everything was questioned about our parents' generation, coming out of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement against Vietnam. And it was revolution. There was revolution everywhere. And we were turning over everything that had existed before. And so that's the context of Stonewall. I mean, it made sense that Stonewall would happen in 1969. But when I was coming out in the early 70s, the clubs still reflected the mentality of the 50s and 60s for women, the clubs for women. Men were different, had more money, they had deeper pockets. So the mafia controlled all the clubs because it was illegal to be homosexual. And the women's clubs really reflected that. They were terrible. But, we had ball. Listen, we were all coming out. We loved being with other women. That was the major thing for all of us. The joy of meeting our own kind and being free and dancing and loving and, glowing to be around each other. But the setting was really repressive, and it showed a total lack of respect for women. And so a lot of us at that time would say, why can't women open another club for women? And we realized, of course, that it was very difficult. And I was very good friends and lovers with my partner. We were close friends, 4 women. And we finally said, we're going to do this. And this was in 1975. And out of naivete, we didn't realize the depth of the mafia involvement. We heard about it in the background, but we were in different worlds. I was a curator, but I was an art historian. I was coming from a totally different place, and I just didn't know. I was naive. But we had this shared desire to do something better, to create something where women could respect themselves when they walked in. And as a result, we finally opened Sahara, and we went through a lot to get it open. We could not tell the state liquor authority we were gay because we never would have gotten a license. It was hard enough that we were 4 women. But we were inspired by the gay rights movement. We were inspired by the second wave of feminism. And as a result, we opened up an elegant club. It was shocking for the time. That's all I could say. It was shocking. And when women walked in, their mouths opened and tears came to, I could cry, and tears came to their eyes. And we handed them flowers as they came in. And everybody who wanted to show their support for the women's movement, which was still in its early stages, the second wave, and the gay rights movement, which was still, even though it was after Stonewall, it still was building momentum, came to this club to show their support. So we had a lot of well-known people. From Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan, and Pat Benatar was our house singer. And, we had Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin, Patti Smith, you name it.
Leslie, thank you so much for sharing that, and I can't wait to hear more. Lisa, let me turn to you. I know you have your own unique experience, and clearly you have a winning formula. Henrietta's is currently the nation's longest running lesbian-centric bar. And I saw Henrietta's described as a queer human space built by lesbians. I love that.
Yes.
So tell me, this is a 2-part question. What defines Henrietta's and the community that you've built, and how is Henrietta's evolved from a lesbian bar?
Sure. Well, Henrietta's is defined really by the patrons. I keep my ear to the ground. Like, I never have to guess what the next thing is to do. It's just revealed to me. I don't know how to describe it. Just by being around people that come in and listening to what they want, and just being connected to my business. To me, Henrietta Hudson sort of has its own heartbeat. It's a living organism to me. So we opened as a lesbian bar in 1991. That's what the community clamored for. And we were, You know you make it in New York City when all the taxi cabs are parked in front of your place, right? I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then by virtue of, once again, just kind of being connected to the business, every 7 years I would hear like a little something in my ear that would get louder and go, it's time for change. And I literally, every 7 years, we pivoted, reinvented, reimagined the vibe, the DJs, the staff. Sometimes you had to make unpopular decisions, but I made them. And, you know, we were known for many years as the Madonna of lesbian bars, which was, you know, cute. I mean, like, because we would always reinvent ourselves. I think after 30 years, I consider us like the Cher of lesbian bars, because we're always going to do that comeback tour again. I knew that my work with marriage equality would adversely affect my business, and for really simple reasons. Lesbians in this area and beyond actually can assimilate into mainstream society more easily than gay men. They were moving to Maplewood, New Jersey. They were having babies. And I love that. I mean, that's what I fought for marriage equality. But now they're drinking in a beer garden in Queens, in Park Slope, in Bay Ridge, in a pub. I had to give them a reason to come back to the West Village, and not to mention Williamsburg with the gay scene, right? So about 7 years ago, I changed everything. I can't say how I did it. That's a secret. But they were very tiny, tiny adjustments. And Henrietta's came back like gangbusters. And we pivoted from lesbian to lesbian-centric queer human bar. And we engaged the entire community, and it was so fun and interesting again. And the newest iteration, we're a queer human bar built by lesbians. So it's even more emphatic that we're all inclusive.
I love that. Thank you so much. You know, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, and I want to address the racial climate in the nightlife scene, both past and present. You know, I think as accepting as some queer places are for people of color, queer spaces often meant exclusion. So over the years, we have heard of racist practices. One example is carding at lesbian bars, you know, only asking patrons of color to show their IDs while hardly carding white customers. So naturally, queer people of color created their own spaces and places. Places like Bonnie and Clyde, a lesbian bar popular with Black women, becoming known in the 1970s as a hangout for politically active lesbians, as well as the place for women, where women socialized across racial and class lines. So in late 1969, almost 6 months after the Stonewall riots in the West Village, the Gay Activist Alliance was founded in New York City. So the group included a Black lesbian caucus, which later renamed itself the Salsa Soul Sisters. I love that name. And it's credited as the oldest Black lesbian organization in the US. It is known today as the African Ancestral Lesbians United for Societal Change. The Salsa Soul Sisters were a collective of Black and Latina lesbians who offered alternatives to the gay scene and the lesbian social scene, which, you know, historically discriminated against lesbians of color. So alas, my question is for Imani. This is also a two-part question. Can you give us some personal background and texture how Salsa Soul Sisters and other groups you've been involved in have intentionally built community? And the second part is, and as a Black two-spirit person in their 80s, where do you find community now?
Okay. Well, this COVID has really been challenging. And so
Yes.
we've all been on Zoom and Zooming. We're all Zoomed out pretty much now. But, okay. So I was a young lesbian, queer, gender fluid woman coming up in Harlem from a middle-class African-American family. My mother was a teacher before me, and I became a teacher. And one of the things I noticed was that, you know, we weren't able to wear pants. I started teaching in 62. And I think it was about 10 years later we were able to wear pants to work. So I mean, it was that kind of that kind of repressive setting. And in terms of okay, so with me, I have two masters. I got the first one at NYU. That was my alma mater, where my bachelor's, where I obtained that. And then I moved to the village. I moved to the East Village. I was living between Second and Third Avenues. And actually, were no African Americans on my block. I remember Lily, who was the comedian Lily Tomlin. She was one of the people that lived on my block. She had just come up, up north, and she was wasn't even starting out. If she was, wasn't aware of it. But I had this little apartment with the kitchen was in the tub was in the kitchen, and the toilet was in the water closet. And of course, so it was one of those $50 a month apartments, and it was near NYU, so I could go to graduate school. I could work during the day, teach in Harlem, and then come back and go to NYU. Now, I wasn't familiar with any queer women as of yet, except my partner that I had come out with. So I belonged to a black sorority, AKA, and my partner and I were in the same sorority, and we kind of came out together. And when we would go around our sorority sisters, and in the bar, actually, I remember it happening. One of the older ones said, "God damn, if you don't look like a bulldagger." And so we came home and looked in the mirrors. What are we, what signs are we showing and whatnot? So it was that kind of atmosphere. My mom my mom loved me, and she, irregardless, but there was a big question mark on her face whenever she saw a queer person in the street, she'd say, "There's another one, there's another one." And so, again, I was not probably privy to the bar scene until I was about 20, I would say about 24 years old. Somebody told me about a queer bar on Hudson Street on the west side in the village, and I went there and I was so excited because I got to see. I said, "Oh, these are lesbians." However, you wouldn't really know it unless you heard the conversation. They were truck drivers, they said, by profession. And then I heard the word dyke. So dyke truck drivers. And I was curious. I listened more. And they talked about how they went to the bathroom standing up. And they had, it was so culture shocking for me. But I hung in there. I went back a couple of times. I was kind of invisible. Nobody really noticed me or spoke to me, really, about anything. And then one day I met Pat, a friend that became a friend until she died about 2 years ago. And I said, "Oh, another black lesbian, another black lesbian." So that was another point of excitement. She lived in the village, and she was one that would sneak in there because she was married to a husband, but she would sneak in there on the weekends. So that was my first experience with the bars. And then later on, I went to Salsa Soul Sisters, which was founded, by the way, by my best friends, who is also chairs the Kwanzaa organization with me till this day. So the Kwanzaa that we practice came out of that organization, because I said, by the time I got there, I said, "Oh, we need to be doing something that's related to the African experience." But to your question, when we would go out, let me mention Cassandra Grant. Did I say that? She is the founder of Salsa Soul Sisters, which is the oldest black lesbian organization in the United States, but therefore in the world. I'm world traveled, so luckily, I got those summers off, and I didn't have children, and so I got to travel all over the world every summer and live in a different place. but I would go to Bonnie and Clyde's when on the weekend sometimes with some of the sisters. Now you have to understand that at that point there was Betty Powell, who and you may know this name, and there was several other sisters like Jewel Gomez and Cheryl Clark were more in the larger community. You know, people we have a saying that we follow our destiny. Some people's work is to work in the larger community. Our work was to build political spaces for our African American population. Because when we would go to Bonnie and Clyde's, we would notice that everybody else got in. We had to produce all kinds of IDs, which was, I guess, a way to deter us. But we hung in there and we went in and we danced. And of course, if you know, we love to dance. And so that would be a way to release some of the stress, what it meant to go to the school system every day, to when the mamas would even say, God damn, if you don't look like a bulldagger, I would say, and so. And they say, oh, okay, it's all right, it's okay. So, you know, we had to defend ourselves in our own community, and also we also have membership in several communities. So also in the queer community.
Thank you so much, Imani. And, I think so much of what you talked about really speaks to the need to create safe spaces, for our community and how, Salsa Soul Sisters and, places like the Sahara and Henrietta's and Bonnie and Clyde's and others, became those safe havens. And clearly these safe spaces are also, not immune from issues of racism, transphobia, biphobia. And so I want to talk a little bit with each of you, Leslie and Lisa, about, kind of dynamics around race in your spaces. So in particular, Leslie, how did you experience racial dynamics at the Sahara and in the larger feminist and lesbian movement in the 1970s?
This is a very, very delicate subject. It really is. Because, I grew up with the civil rights movement and, I was one of those people marching in Harlem and, when Selma, Alabama happened. However, the racism in our society is really deeply embedded, and I could see it at Sahara all the time, and it really disturbed me. As a nightclub owner, white, not all, not by no means all of the white clientele, but a group would comment when too many black people were in the club. It was a very horrific, disturbing situation. It was one that I just had to deal with. It was, there was nothing I could really do other than, I never, we never had an issue at the door of who to let in. Everybody was welcome at our club. And we had a mix. I mean, I think it was known mostly as a white club, but there were plenty of black women who were in the club also. And they would kind of, there was actually they made their own section up in the dance floor. They had their own area that they would congregate in, which was interesting. But I can tell you that racism was always an issue. It still is. It always, I don't think it will ever totally go away, but it's something that you just, there's not much you can do. I mean, we featured black writers. We featured, Nisaki Shange came a couple of times to the club. They actually performed. A woman named Tulani. I don't know. There was a group that created a show which actually went to the Joe Papp theater. I'm not forget, but that was created out of Sahara, which was 3 black women reading poetry and performing with music behind them. So we had a mix of that, but it's a problem. it is really a time.
And it sounds, Leslie, that that as Imani describes, the driver behind the forming of Salsa Soul Sisters and places like Bonnie and Clyde's, that resonates given your experience in Sahara in the 70s.
Yeah, I certainly understand it. I totally get it. I just, again, I don't know what the answer is to get that kind of deep embedded racist attitude out of some of these white women. But, and again, I think that, I'm glad that, and I hope that it changes, but I'm glad for people who create these spaces for women.
Well, I would say,
And I think an important piece is talking about it and having conversations and dialogues like we're having right now. Lisa, I actually have a question for you, which is, when issues of racism, transphobia, or biphobia kind of rear their ugly heads, which
Sure.
they're wont to do, how do you handle it at Henrietta's?
Well, it's pretty simple for me. It is anyway. We have not done things perfectly over 30 years, and I'll take responsibility for that. At a very big chunk of time, from I would say 2000. When I was doing my marriage equality work, I didn't jump ship, but I was never at my bar, and I left it unattended for a while. And when I came back and took a look at it, I didn't really like what I saw, and there was some, I would say, more than microaggression with letting certain people of color in the door, like an overwhelming dress code. I made changes. I fell asleep at the wheel. I'm going to take responsibility for that. But I made some changes pretty rapidly in, I guess, 2013, 2012, where I ripped down almost all of the dress code except for baseball hats. And around a year ago today, I was called out on social media for the baseball, even having that baseball hat thing. And it was a woman who used to work for me, or for the woman who was running the space, but ultimately me. And we had a FaceTime, a very emotional, amazing conversation on FaceTime where she told me everything she was feeling. I took responsibility for not being perfect. I completely abolished any dress code whatsoever. That was about a year ago. We were closed at the time, but it's still in place. But, we have to, you don't have to be perfect, right? But the important thing is to look at where you made a mistake, own it, and change it. As far as discrimination of any kind, it's just not allowed in Henrietta Hudson. Trans women have always been comfortable at Henrietta's from Jump Street. And any customers that have an issue with that, I'll have a conversation with them about it. And I pretty much can change hearts and minds. But mostly people get it. We're all community. Inclusion isn't a choice, it's a reflex for me. It's just, how do you think about the Stonewall Rebellion? It was spearheaded by trans women of color and my dear friend Stormy, a butch black lesbian dyke, right? They were at the forefront of Stonewall. What happened for the first parade? They were excluded. Dykes and trans folks. So now it's, I don't know how many years later, I'm not excluding anybody. I'm not going to repeat that bad aspect of gay history. We need to change that.
Lisa, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your candor, your vulnerability. I was going to Henrietta Hudson's before 2013, and I remember those dress code signs, and they were everywhere. And to your credit, you got rid of that. I was also going to Henrietta's after that, and I saw that was removed, and a different kind of feel outside when you first walk into the bar. So if that's not progress, I don't know what is. So congrats to you for owning up to it and fixing it. Let me shift gears a little bit here. And I want to talk about the feminist movement. New York City saw a wave of lesbian bar openings in the 70s and the 80s. And, it was blustered by the surging feminist movement of the time. So Leslie, this one's for you. When the Sahara opened in the 70s, it was one of the first ever lesbian clubs to be owned and operated by lesbian women for lesbian women. And I wish I was there, but I was a little too young. So the Sahara, from what I know, was a dynamic space. It's where feminist and queer activism and culture just really blossomed. And in an interview I read about you, you noted, and this is a quote from you, Sahara turned the tables on the whole game because before that, the whole concept of lesbianism was changing, but the clubs weren't changing. The gay rights movement and the second wave of feminism was happening, but the clubs still reflected what was going on in the 50s and the 60s. So Leslie, I'm dying to know, can you tell us more about what you meant about the Sahara turning tables?
Well, absolutely. Like I was saying initially, we grew up in this era of total oppression towards, we know already that we live in a patriarchal society. But, to imagine what it was like growing up in the 50s and 60s, when women couldn't even get a credit card without their husband's signature. I mean, I could tell you when we went to the State Liquor Authority, and we were 4 women, and this was in 75, I guess, maybe 76. They asked us to provide affidavits from our closest male relatives to show that we were legitimate. In other words, here were 4 women, and where were they coming from to apply for a liquor license? Were they mafia, covers for the mob? Were they prostitutes? That was their frame reference. That was their frame of reference. So, here we were, young, educated. We considered ourselves pretty hip, and what is this? I'm not dealing with this. It was almost like, everybody was telling me that I was, that who we were was wrong, was perverse, was wrong, and we were powerless. And we finally said, enough of this. We are going to do something that's going to give women a sense of respect, and they're going to feel that they're worth it. And of course, it became a showcase for feminism. I just want to explain, I was never a political person. I was never an activist in the sense of I was not marching and all. My activism came from the way I chose to live my life. It was a personal, like they say, the personal is political. Well, in my case, it was. So yes, it became a showcase for anybody who wanted to support the women's movement. Now you have to understand, at the time of Sahara, the women's movement up until that time was kind of radical. It didn't encompass a large audience of women. It was more of a minority group of women who were radical and who also at times became almost fascist in their demands of what constituted a feminist. So Sahara was a tool for widening the spectrum of feminism to reach a broader audience.
I love that. Thank you, Leslie. If I had a time machine, that's exactly where I would have it take me. That was wonderful. Thank you. As we've noted, Henrietta's has always been a venue that utilized a platform for social change also. So Lisa, please take me back to 1991. It was the beginning of the third wave of the feminist movement, spurred by the Riot Girl movement. Feminists embraced diversity and individualism in women and really sought to redefine what it meant to be a feminist. So what did the queer feminist scene in New York look like for you at that time? And what was Henrietta's role in that movement?
Sure. There was a sort of a dichotomy of, listen, it was when it first opened, it was predominantly a white um, client base. Back then, it was like there were white lesbian bars and black lesbian bars. Like Crazy Nannies was more catered to the black community. We catered to the white community. So we had like the lipstick lesbians, right? Where like Cindy Crawford and Katie Lang were on the cover of, I think, Cosmo, one of those magazines. Melissa Etheridge would come through. It was like we did live rock and roll music, but that was the business end of it, right? But me, as the crazy activist that I am, I always had like the dyke action machine in there, right? And all like the heavy duty activists, dykes on bikes. And so it was kind of this split venue where like it was, like white girls with lipstick and then like radical lesbians making the change. And somehow, everybody did get along. And when Crazy Nannies closed, I don't remember what year that was. It was great because then we got to be an all-inclusive venue. We got to like have this more of a multicultural experience at Henrietta's. And, that always makes a place more interesting. I mean, diversity, let's face it. And that's why, like, when the young queer kids took back the word queer and reclaimed it, and this generation of non-binary, young kids, queer, gender non-conforming, to me, I see it as bursting onto the scene because it was new for me. I could not wait to get them in Henrietta's, and they weren't coming. So I go to so many events. I was at, I think it might have been a Sage event, and there was this young group of young queer kids, and I walked over to them, didn't say who I was, said, hey kids, would you guys ever go to Henrietta Hudson? And they went, no, that place is so old. And I was like, you know what? That's all I needed to hear. And that was my prompt to like, you know what, Lisa, you got to go back. You got to do the work again. And I went back in, I did the work, and they came, so you got to do the work. You can't just like snap your fingers and people run through the front door. You got to put the work in. So that's why we're still here.
And hats off to you, Lisa, for continuing to do the work, right? And continuing to evolve with our community and making sure that, Henrietta's is a welcoming space for, the beautiful and incredible and deep diversity of gender and sexual orientation and race and ethnicity. Imani, I'm going to bring it back to you here. Mariam kicked us off talking about the feminist movement, and Salsa Soul Sisters is a Black feminist organization. So what I'd love to hear from you is how did the Salsa Soul Sisters both support each other on an individual level, and also what did like activism look like for the Salsa Soul Sisters?
Okay, well, I personally never really identify as a Black feminist myself personally. I think I identify as Black, lesbian, butch, and sort of, I might not say radical, revolutionary. I might say I probably was more in awe of Malcolm X than I was of Dr. King. Although I appreciate King towards the end of his life. For me, what our focus in Salsa Soul Sisters was about, we say that we are all sisters, that there were many Black women that came there that already had children. And so later on, we would found the Kwanzaa kids. For us, we have a lot of emphasis on our young and keeping that intergenerational relationship. And so I remember when the Graduate Center was giving an event. It was the Black Lesbian. It was the Lesbian Conference about 10 years ago. And some friends were staying with me from North Carolina, Alexis Pauline Gums and her partner, Shango Dare. And they called me and said, we know you're on your way here, but can you come and be on the panel with us? Because they noticed that there was no input for us. We were not included. In other words, even though we were an organization that was started in 1974. So lesbians in the 70s, we should have been there. And so I got on the panel with them, and I talked about some of the history. And afterwards, the white women, there were only white women in that workshop. And they came up afterwards saying, oh my goodness, we envy you so, because we were separatists. When we had our music festivals, we said that, mothers of young boy children could not bring them. That we were separatists. We separated from the younger women, from the older ones, from the boys, the men, and whatnot. We as Black lesbians could not afford that, because we had sons and fathers and brothers that were being jailed, that the industrial prison complex was alive and well. And so our emphasis, even today, it's not unusual to have an 81-year-old very good friends with the 35-year-olds. With the trans community, we embrace them all as family. And so I learned from white lesbians there and later that, embracing all and whatnot is something that white lesbians, many of them, maybe not you, but would say that kind of relationship that we have, it's imperative for us to have that, because when I'm gone, it's going to be so important that the youth, some of whom may be queer and some who may not, but that their attitudes towards us and towards people that look like us and people whose lifestyles are like us would be transformed, that they will know who we are and respect us and want to be like us and so on. So that's why I think to say feminist for me is too limiting. And for me, it's more about our youth who are coming up behind us and being able to instill in them what is our legacy.
Thank you, Imani. Leslie, Lisa, Imani, you did a fantastic job just really painting a picture of what the past was in the bar scene, but also in the political and social scene too. And it was just lovely to hear. What I want to do now is close out by going to the future. And I'm sure you've all seen it over the past few months. Several publications, including the New York Times, published articles about the disappearance of lesbian and queer-centered spaces. Over the last decade, 37% of the country's gay bars shut down, including 52% of lesbian bars and 59% of bars serving queer people of color. So, in fact, the pandemic, and I think you all would agree, the pandemic has accelerated the closure of lesbian bars across the United States. And now there are only 21 left in the country, 3 of them being in New York. One of those is Henrietta Hudson's, of course. And one of the reasons why Brooklyn filmmakers and co-directors Erica Rose and Alina Street launched the Lesbian Bar Project was to create awareness about the disappearance of these bars. And they created a short documentary about it. Leah Delaria, known for many things, particularly as Boo in Orange is the New Black. She is the executive producer and narrator of it. And I also joined as executive producer for the second wave of the campaign that's going on now all through June. So if you want to learn more how to help these bars, including Henrietta Hudson's, just find our Instagram page at Lesbian Bar Project. and you can find more information there.
So Mariam, I want to turn the tables before we go to our panelists here. Like, what do you think the future is for lesbian and queer spaces? And
I think a lot of us who are familiar with the lesbian bar culture have theories on why those spaces are decreasing. It could be because, kind of what Lisa was getting at. I'll say it in a different way, though. Women tend to settle down, U-haul it, and disappear into the abyss and never be seen again. There could be a shift in online dating culture, which is, I think, in part to blame. And for my world, perhaps the financial inequality of women. But whatever it is, it just feels like we're at some kind of inflection point right now, post-pandemic. So I don't know if they'll survive, but my hope is that they will adapt and they'll become a safe space for marginalized genders, women, NBs, and trans folks. And I think it's an important question, and thank you for asking. I want to open up that same question to our esteemed panelists. So starting with you, Lisa, same question. What's the future of the lesbian and queer spaces for us?
Sure. I think the future is right now. The more that young queer people have the language and the space to be more precise about who they are, they might not fit in the box of lesbian, but they're having two women are having a relationship together. They're not calling it lesbian, right? That's semantics. So as people feel more comfortable being their authentic self and expressing it, like years ago, if there was a they, them, I would probably be they, them. She, they now, right? Because I have to live in the middle because of my past experience. But I want to speak to what Imani said about the intergenerational connections, because that is the future of all queer spaces, I think. And I've been asked the question, what's it like when an older hardcore dyke is at the bar and these young queer kids come, through the space? It is beautiful. They're like in each other's laps within 4 minutes. Like there'll be an older lesbian at the bar, just throwing them back. Young queer kid sidles up to the bar to get a drink. They start talking. The young queer kid wants to know about the history. The older lesbian is like, wow, you guys are so free and interesting, full on. And it works. You just have to offer the space for them to do it. The future is now.
Thank you. And we'll ask the same question. Leslie, you're up to bat. Same question, please.
Well, of course, I really hope that these spaces continue, because they're such a gift. I mean, and also I don't quite understand why they're not still going. I mean, don't people want the physical contact? Don't they want to feel each other? I mean, touch each other, kiss, love. I mean, how can you not want to be with your own kind? I mean, that's the thing. There's a sexuality. There's the buzz. You want that. So, please don't, keep creating these spaces where women, and again, I mean, whatever you want to identify yourself as, it's fine. It's queer, non-binary. I mean, my identity is always changing. I mean, I hate to overuse the term fluid, but I mean, I've gone from feeling more female to more male to, if you ask me depends on what stage of my life or who I'm with. I mean, if I'm with a woman who's more feminine, I'm going to be more masculine. If I'm with a woman who's more masculine, I'm going to be more feminine. It's just our nature. So be together, share that buzz, share that joy. That's all I think.
Leslie, I love that. Thank you. We need to end these virtual events and do exactly what you just described. So I will be there soon. And of course, we'll close out with Imani. Same question to you. Where do you see the future for our spaces?
I see the future for these spaces as being more, somebody said something about making adjustments. I see it as having a program, because I learned programming in Salsa Soul Sisters, and so I was the Thursday night chairperson. And I can see people with a cocktail in their hands or not, not an alcoholic drink, and sitting around in circles and talking about for a part of the time. And let's talk about change. We can't just wait for change to happen. As Audrey said, organize, organize, organize. Some of these people we have been so polarized that many white people did not go to school, their elementary schools, even though there was integration of schools. So many have only had experience with white children, and the black kids only had experience with black children, and so on. I would like to see people actually get in and dig into the meat of how did we get here and how do we change? How do we, and conversations with people so that you understand what the other's experience is, and you don't understand it until you either walked in the shoes of the person or at least had some opportunity to hear their stories. And so you have stories, we have stories. Let's make a time so that we can share our stories and understand and learn more of who we are. And at that point, by learning and doing, I'm sure there'll be change. We don't have to sit and wait for somebody else to do it. The ball is in our park, and we need to do what we know, get those young people in there, the older people, the middle-aged people, everybody talking about how do we make this lesbian, queer, gender binary, trans, everything, how do we make this community the model for the world?
Imani, last words, and we have our marching orders. We have our charge going forward. So I think that's exactly what we're hoping to do. You know, if there's one thing that I know about our community is that we know how to take care of each other. We know how to push for change, and we know how to create new models, right, of being in community. So I just want to thank you all so much for being here, for sharing your stories, for being trailblazers. And I really hope in the not so distant future, we can continue this conversation over a cocktail or mocktail at Henrietta Hudson's. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. You've heard our charge from Imani, Leslie, and Lisa. It's up to us to build an intergenerational, intersectional movement. One where Julia, who I talked about earlier, is supported by phone calls from a young trans man. One where, as Lisa said, older lesbians and younger non-binary people come together to learn from each other. One where Imani can be in community at Sage Harlem with other Black and Latina lesbians. And that's the world we hope to build with you, with your commitment and with your support. If you haven't yet contributed to Sage, or even if you have and were moved by tonight's program, please make a gift today. The link is in the chat and also at the bottom of the screen. Your support will fuel Sage's efforts to build a world in which our elders are respected, supported, and valued. A world where intergenerational connections and intersectional identities strengthen our community and are celebrated. Again, please give now. And that link is in the chat and also at the bottom of the screen. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And now it's time to dance. You can join the virtual dance party through the link in the chat. And now, I've always wanted to say this, DJ Tika, drop the beat.